Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this COVID-safe legal compliance webinar run by Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director of Kaizen Synergy Law Firm, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Today's session specifically focuses on the workplace mandatory vaccination rules for employers, businesses, specifically focusing on the documentation requirements. As part of these sessions that we are running, we are focusing on key topics that agencies need to be aware about as the public health rules around COVID legislation changes, and also focusing on how agencies can effectively manage their legal compliance obligations and also be across what fines that are potentially being used by government agencies and the likes to ensure that agencies meet their legal compliance obligations. Today's session focuses on what are the rules as well as what are the documents that you should or must hold onto. We're going to be looking at case studies to see what other agencies exactly like yours are actually doing to meet their legal compliance obligations and what systems, processes they're actually using to ensure that this is done just very, very effectively as well too. That said, there is a lot of confusion out there at the moment. Rules are continuously seeming to change as well too, and agencies are just looking for some clear directions on what their legal compliance obligations are and how to actually meet those. So we are going to be looking at what are the rules. We're going to be giving you the backgrounds about where these rules come from as well too, and with that giving you some directions on what you need to do, but as well as drawing the line of what should be done as opposed to what must be done by businesses as well. As always, we like to just throw up the recommendations right at the start of these webinars that we do run. This gives you an idea of where we're actually heading and also summarizes the take-home messages for yourselves as well. So essentially the outcomes of or recommendations of today's session is to recommend that you set up your business COVID-safe HR registers. We'll show you what these actually look like, and also avoid penalties and meet your work health and safety obligations as well too. We are going to show you the Gemba 360 dashboard as well too, which a lot of agencies are using. Since the start of last year, we have opened this out to over 4,000 agencies around the country, and they are using it to essentially meet their compliance objectives very, very easily and simply. You will already have access to your Gemba dashboard, and all attendees joining us today have access to this as a single seat to actually use for your compliance objectives. If you do have any questions, by all means, please contact me directly. My mobile number is listed or has been listed on Google since February last year, where we have been running these open legal compliance forums. Or you can reach out directly to our support desk at support@gemba360.com, which is our legal compliance program service area here at Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. You can also reach out to us on our 1300 360 360 number, wherever you are around the country and joining us today or listening to this webinar. Looking forward to next week, we are going to be looking at implementing the HR COVID Safe workplace forms, policy documents, and also roadmaps from around the country. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar and recorded, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. So just a brief introduction about Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. A lot of what we are talking about today is information that we have provided in the past to community service organizations around the country. We are going to be looking at the rules in a number of states as well too. We're going to talk about some of the overlaps in the rules. And when I say overlaps, messages and directives coming out of different state jurisdiction areas and what your business needs to comply with. We're also going to be looking at what are the more specific areas within each state requirements and unpacking those as well too. A lot of our legal work in the last 12 months has focused on things like setting up COVID testing clinics, vaccination clinics, legal agreements, policy documents, broadly helping agencies with their COVID safe plans as well too, and also HR contracts for their staff as well too. So we're well versed in the different COVID safe legal rules around the country. If you do have any questions that you want to raise, then by all means, please use the chat group, chat line here, and you can raise your questions as we go through it. Certainly, if you do have any questions that you want to ask, then by all means, please reach out to us, particularly in this COVID safe space as well. So let's have a look at the legislation and where these come from and what are the directives that your agency needs to be across. Essentially, there are public health orders that you might have heard about on the news, and this is what the news does report each night on. So essentially, public health orders are made under the public health legislation. Over the last few months, there have been announcements made by various state premiers under directions from their respective chief health officers in each state. And the chief health officer has these powers given to them under relevant public health and wellbeing legislation. So in Victoria, it is the Public Health and Wellbeing Act, in New South Wales, the Public Health Act, and in Queensland, the Health and Wellbeing Act as well too. Now, essentially, during public health emergencies, these legislations can be used by the chief health officer to issue public health directions. And these directions are really there to assist in containing or responding to a spread of disease, for example, in the community, and in this case, it is COVID-19. So it is under the respective public health legislation that the chief health officers have issued directions on mandatory vaccinations for specific worker groups in each state. Now, if we were to look at these, of what these actually look like, and I will just bring these up for you to view as well too. We can see, for example, in Victoria, when I'll just bring these up here we go here, and we'll look at what some of the others say. Essentially, they are referred to, and you would view them as these. Now, where these come from is, as I mentioned, under the Chief Health Officer. With them, they define what work or who the workers or groups are, and also who the employers are and what their requirements are. Now, when we scroll down, and I will unpack this in the next few slides as well too, they identify, for example, vaccination status information. It identifies who employers are, but then drills down into specific, what I'll call, workers or employee groups. So this might include, for example, accommodation workers, agricultural workers, airport workers, who authorised officers are, which we'll come to, community workers, etc., creative arts, custodial workers. So you can see there's a whole range of specific workers that are defined under this, including education providers as well too, justice workers, manufacturing, etc., as part of that. Similarly, when we look at, for example, New South Wales as well too, and I'll unpack New South Wales and Queensland shortly, again, public health orders are written in the same format, and they are identified of who is covered within these and what are the penalties that are for breaching public health orders as well too. And essentially, we will send you out copies of all of these documents that I'm referring to for your reference today as well. I can just see a few questions coming up already around this. Yes, we will be sending out copies of all of these slides, and the recordings will also be made available today. That said, if you are listening to this recording after today's live session, you can reach out to us and we will send you out these resources as well. So if we were to just to go back to our slides and essentially look at, well, what does this mean for agencies like yourselves? Essentially, if we start to unpack these, and we'll look at Victoria, then drop down into Queensland and New South Wales as well too. Essentially, under each of the directives, there are timelines that you need to meet. Where timelines aren't provided, it's effectively a directive that's coming out on that date that we can see within the public health order. So on Friday, the 15th of October, so just this past week, the Chief Health Officer made an updated public health directive. Hence the reason we are running this session and including this session in today's weekly COVID safe public webinars. So essentially the purpose is to impose updated obligations upon employers in relation to the vaccination of workers. This was, and we can see the shift in these public health directives on moving it from just, I'll say, the vaccination directives for people in the community to now directly informing employers of their obligations directly to manage their workforce. So there is a very clear shift of responsibility onto employers that provide workers in those defined fields that I just mentioned before as well. And there's a whole range of employee groups as well too. The entire public health directive is some 26 pages long. And it does include even broadly including areas from community health services, justice workers across to food manufacturing, and also food trucks as well too. Now, as I've mentioned, the purpose is to impose updated obligations on employers in relation to their vaccination of workers. And these updated legal requirements impose new document management obligations on employers. So what is essentially required? Now, let's summarize these down. What we can see, and these do change slightly in each state, but the end effect is to look at documentation of vaccine information of employees. Now, we've just had a question on this just being asked, does this include only paid employees or is it personnel more broadly, for example, volunteers or even members of charities, board members, etc. So essentially, we'll come to those, but broadly, the definition of employees from a work health and safety point of view is viewed as broad here. So I will essentially, it doesn't specify whether it's paid or unpaid or volunteers. It is workers within those categories. So essentially, by the 15th of October, these requirements that we can see in Victoria, if a worker is scheduled to work outside the worker's ordinary place of residence after the 15th, then employers must collect, record, and hold vaccination information about the worker. So essentially, outside the worker's ordinary place of residence is essentially another way of saying someone's primary home. If you collect information that a worker is partially vaccinated, so that means they might have had one of the two jabs, then you must also collect, record, and hold information about whether that worker has a booking to receive the vaccine by the 26th of November. So you can see now that we're starting to drill into some really specific documentation that your employer, business, or agency must hold. So essentially, if someone has their first jab, then you need to essentially hold on to information about when they're going to receive their second jab prior to the 26th of November deadline. Now, if a person is unvaccinated, then you must also collect, record, and hold information about whether that worker has a booking to receive their jab by the 22nd of October. So that's only in the next few days. If a worker is unvaccinated, then you must not permit a worker who is unvaccinated to work for your agencies outside the worker's ordinary place of residence. So essentially, you can see that there are stringent work requirements that agencies need to have in place. Importantly, if you do not have vaccination information about a worker, so if you don't have information about your personnel staff, then you must treat the worker as unvaccinated. And that means unvaccinated, if we go back to this slide here, then again, you must record this information out as well too. And they're not permitted to work outside their ordinary home, essentially is what this is saying. Now, the directives, which is, I'm going to say, grey in this space, is that it says you must comply with these obligations as soon as possible. But there isn't a timeline on when agencies need to start to get all this information together. But essentially, these dates means that you've got those directives there in the event that you are audited by authorised officers, which may require inspection of your company records under this public health directive. And these authorised officers are those people authorised by the Department of Health. Now, one of the questions that people then get asked is, well, what are the penalties for non-compliance of these particular requirements? And each state has its own specific penalties. In Victoria, it means that any person who has refused or failed to comply with a direction given to a person may be in breach of the public health directive. Now, when we essentially calculate this, it means that for a person, it is up to 120 penalty units, which is about 21,000 under calculation. And for your agency, up to 600 penalty units, which is about $109,000. A person is found not guilty of an offence if the person had a reasonable excuse for refusing or failing to comply with the direction or requirement. Now, with it, what I will also just jump to is in New South Wales, essentially, and I will just make this screen bigger, we can see penalties for breaching the public health order. And essentially, it is found that it is offence to not comply with a public health order, whereby a maximum penalty of imprisonment for 6 months and or a penalty up to $11,000 can apply, plus a further fine of $5,500 each day if the offence continues. Corporations, businesses that fail to comply with the directions are liable up to $55,000 plus a further $27,500 fine each day that the offence continues for breaching penalties under a public health order. I thank Karen for just reaching out around this, and I think this will answer your question around this particular item as well too. We will be circulating this other information out to all attendees that are joining us today. Also, there are a whole range of what I'll call subsequential fines in New South Wales, where they're also broken them down to on-the-spot fines. So things like $5,000 for a breach of Clause 6.2 under the Public Health Delta Outbreak Order, which is what we're referring to here, specifically for New South Wales as well too, and also $3,000 for breach of specific clauses within each of the defined areas. So you can find that specifically around this, New South Wales has gone essentially much more direct in terms of where their fines are for not complying with these public health orders. And essentially, we will send you these details in today's session as well. With it, what we are also finding is that, which I will add, there's also overlap across work health and safety obligations, which I'll come to in a minute as well too, but also under specific state laws, there are what we call the Crimes Document Destruction Act. And the Crimes Document Destruction Act inserted a new criminal offence. This was actually back in 2006. Where it inserted a new requirement where people who destroy a document or thing that is reasonably likely to be required in a legal proceeding carries a criminal offence. So this not only talks about under criminal law, document destruction is also something that you need to be aware about. So when we're talking of COVID safety documents, essentially this is certainly something that is and can be used in legal proceedings. We've seen this around the country already in different court cases or workplace issues or the likes. So essentially, document destruction and is a requirement that your agency needs to follow as well too. Certainly across this, the penalty of this offence carries up to even 5 years imprisonment or a fine of up to $64,000. And this is something that has been in place since September 2006. So it's been around for some time. But essentially, it creates a criminal offence which applies to documents which are likely to be used in all kinds of legal proceedings as well too. Now, with it, again, for some of these, when you add these to obligations that you have under public health directives, then essentially here penalty breaches can be imposed for up to 600 penalty units, which is around $100,000 for corporations, and also for personal, for people not holding on to information, then essentially up to $21,000. Now, this is something we're just referring to, but it is something that you need to be mindful of as well too. Now, in New South Wales, they do refer to authorised workers to a person who lives in a declared local government area of concern, but there are changes to this already since we put these slides up. Now, what is required is that there are directives for authorised workers who must have at least one dose of the COVID vaccine or evidence of a medical exemption, and if they are registered to travel with also Service New South Wales as well too. These requirements do not apply to workers on construction sites who have special vaccination requirements already. Authorised workers who are unable to have a COVID-19 vaccine can request a COVID vaccine exemption for medical reasons. Maureen has just asked if an employer gets an employee to get a vaccine, to get vaccinated, and the employee gets injured, like blood clots, who pays for the liability, the employer or the government? With this, Maureen, what we have suggested, and you would have seen this in our previous webinars as well too, if an employer gets requires an employee to have the vaccination because it is under a public health order, essentially there is already direction from the government about indemnity. I believe there are already covering medical practitioners for the administering of vaccines. That said, there is also the part of the consent and also the medical screening that practitioners do already do before administering any of the vaccines directly itself. In Queensland, the Chief Health Officer of Queensland has issued public health directions for mandatory vaccination. This requirement does not apply to everyone. It does, however, apply to health and aged care workers, quarantine workers, and essential workers crossing into Queensland from interstate as well. What we do find across this is that there is overarching occupational health and safety requirements that workplaces need to be across. This means that there are extended obligations on employers under occupational health and safety legislation that must be considered in this space. There is an obligation on employers and employees to ensure the workplace is kept safe as possible from COVID-19. And this may include mandatory vaccination for all employees. Now, under work health and safety or occupational health and safety laws, an employee can be a person, a contractor, can be a volunteer as well too. So we are seeing that the broader definition of employees is being used here. Now, in saying this, how do you actually meet your compliance obligations, and what are other agencies actually doing to in fact do this? Now, with that, you can essentially, which we will just open up for you as well too. And somebody has just asked, can we get access to all of these resources? Yes, just to confirm this as well too. Essentially, all our resources are being made available on our website, which you can see here. It is also being made available on our YouTube channel as well. And with it, you will get your logins, if you don't have them already, to the Gemba 360 dashboard, which is our law firm's compliance system that a lot of agencies use. Once you log in, you will essentially see this dashboard here. It is open for your agency to view. With that, once you log in, and let's just go through this, we've looked at things like vaccinated, partially vaccinated, unvaccinated, and exemptions around the public health orders that we are seeing. So when we actually look at this and looking back at the specific, what I'll call criteria and definitions of what people are using, here it is here. If I go to the public health order, and we can see fully vaccinated, partially vaccinated, unvaccinated, or an accepted person, essentially is what the definitions that are being consistently used. Now, when you click on, and what agencies are doing is utilizing the Gemba 360 HR module to manage their information around this. So essentially, when we click on HR management, we're bringing up this screen here. From here, if I wanted to do this from the start, and I'll show you how this essentially works as well too, what you are able to do is load in specific staff and personnel underneath this. So I just did one for Jane Citizen, we can see here, but let's go through this from the start. So essentially you can go in. I'm going to add a new person into this as well. So let's click on add. I'm going to mark that this is a volunteer. And in this case, we're going to put that it is, for example, Fred Flintstone, and has the number here, and essentially click on save. Now, once we create this, you can see that automatically I've got Fred's details listed here. What we are going to do is Fred has told us that he has had the vaccine, and also load in those details as well. So quite simply, we are going to go down. I'm doing this live with you. He is listed in this case as a fully vaccinated person. What we have done is issued the date. He had it yesterday, being Monday, the 18th of October. And in this case, we're going to mark that it's due in 1 year's time. So essentially, we can go in and click on save, and that's been done. So essentially what we have got here is the information that we want to load in. Now, with it, what we can then add from here, if we go in, and let's have a look at somebody else's profile around this, I can also load in very specifically, in this case, somebody's vaccination certificate as well. So I've got the vaccination certificate that we've got, and we're going to place in Fred's vaccination certificate that he's got from MyGov around this. And essentially what we've then done here is loaded that in and placed it in here, and it's done. Same thing if I wanted to go in and have a look at, let's say, Jane Citizen's information as well too. We can go in. This is someone that I've done previously and loaded their information in, and we can then look at Jane's vaccination certificate. I've got the date that it was issued and started. And if I wanted to have a look at Jane's certificate or show it to an authorized officer, we can do that directly from here. And here it is loaded. And this was something that we just used as an example directly under and directly from the Australian government's templates that they've loaded up as well. And we can see that here. Equally, for your agency, one of the things that people do ask us on is, can we just simply run reports to say that we've met all these requirements? So quite simply, we can go back, and with this, if an authorized officer shows up and you need to show them that you've got all your information at hand, you can simply go to the report section. You can go to the vaccination report, click on run, and here it is here. I've got all of this information ready to go, as well as the status of what those details are. So it is really simple to essentially use. Cam has just asked, under OH&S requirements, would it be reasonable to direct staff to not service a COVID positive client regardless of vaccination status of workers? Cam, this is a really interesting topic question. So Cam has just asked to repeat that again. Under OH&S requirements, would it be reasonable to direct staff to not service a COVID positive client? With this, Cam, in the community services sector, obviously there are going to be clients that may not have had the vaccine and are, or may, as you say, in this case, COVID positive. With that, we are recommending that agencies do take precautions around this. We have covered off in previous webinars, essentially, firstly, screening clients around whether they have had the vaccine or whether they haven't had the vaccine, and whether there are potentially symptoms that they are displaying. As part of that, what we are recommending, depending on the services that you deliver, you may want to refer them to another health service provider or work in coordination with them. If you are, for example, a agency that is providing COVID testing, for example, I'll use Rumbalara Aboriginal Cooperative. They provide, their health service provides COVID testing, also COVID vaccinations, but they also provide pandemic support and food packages as well too. So it is, with that, it is, I'm going to say, dependent on your agency's specific services that you deliver, and also the scope of practice of your staff as well too. So again, it is dependent on what services you are running. What we are suggesting is that agencies do review their, what I'll call, intake and service coordination plans in order to ensure that you are meeting your service requirements, but also being able to support clients at the same time as well too. So it will vary, Cam, from agency to agency in terms of what services you are delivering as well too. With it, I will just jump back to our recommendations, because I can see there's a lot of questions coming up around the OH&S obligations. So what we are suggesting is that you look at setting up your business COVID safe HR registers, particularly under the various directives we are seeing from the chief health officers. Look at avoiding penalties and meet your work health and safety obligations. We suggest that you review the Gemba 360 dashboard and manage your documentation. Of course, if you do have any questions, please contact our law firm on 0413 699 515. That is my direct mobile, or alternatively reach our support desk on either our phone number, which is the 1300 360 360, or support@gemba360.com. You can also, which I will add, reach out to us on live chat. So if you are needing support, we can screen share directly with you, directly off the dashboard. And this does work off mobile devices as well too, and also desktop computers as well. Looking forwards to next week, and we will open up the phone lines and question lines as well too. We will be looking at implementing HR COVID safe workplace forms. So that is picking up Cam's question as well too, around screening clients, as well as policy and roadmaps as well too. If you do have any questions, by all means, jump onto our chat line now. We will open up the phone lines as well too, and we will stay online and answer any questions that people might have. If you are listening and watching this recording after today's live session, by all means, please reach out to us on these numbers and support emails as well. we do have these resources that are open and available for you to use commencing today, and we will send these out to you as well. Thank you for joining us today. If you are listening to this after today's live session, we will stop the recording and jump back onto the questions.